Minister, Deputy Minister, the department at large. Chair, we have today the following members who have just joined in. We've got Honorable Chair Dujwa, Honorable Makubele, Honorable Zuma, Honorable Mdabe, Honorable Begram, Honorable Kado, Honorable Hinana, Honorable Mkondo, and Honorable Denner so far, Chair. From the support staff, we've got myself, Chair. We also have Mr. Ngobo, Ms. Ndabeni, Mr. Mukwena, Mr. Maputi, and Ms. Mabindisa. We only received an apology from the Minister, Chair, who's gonna be a bit late. He started at the cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sakas. Any from the DM and DG, your team? Mr. Lamati?
I think the DG, Honorable Chair, will present who's here.
Good
Mr.
morning,
Lamati.
Good morning,
Thank
Honorable Chairperson and the honorable members and the colleagues from the department and AGSA. Chair, we have obviously are led by Deputy Minister because the Minister will join late. We have the DDG responsible for public employment services, Mr. Sam Morotoba. We have the DDG responsible for corporate services, Ms. Matebesi. And we have the COO of the department, Ms. Marsha Bronkhorst. We have the Commissioner of UIF, Tebogo Maruping, and we have the Commissioner of CF, which is Compensation Fund, Mr. Vuyo Mafata. And we have our communication acting chief director, Petunia. You'll see a person who's joined using Petunia. That's communication from us. And we have Ms. Mahakane in the office of the DM. We have chief of staff, the ministry, Mr. Mutumela. And who else is here? We have Matapelo in my office. We have Mr. Tando Wababa. And I think those are just the people that we have. We have Sabelo, of course, the spokesperson in the minister's office, chairperson. And we have Mr. Temingosim Kalipi, who's the acting DDG Labor Market Policy and Industrial Relations. We have Zandi Mweli in the office of the DM. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DG. The office of the AG, can we?
Good morning, Honorable Chair. I hope I'm visible. My video seems to be creating problems.
You are not visible. It's only your background and your name. Otherwise, the face, we can't see the face. Not unless it's only me that has got that problem.
Okay, no, I can see that. I'm going to try and deal with it again. I will need to log in again because I think it's picking up from another device. My apology for that. But without delaying the committee, Honorable Chair, from our side, I'm joined by, I'm Khabuko Mapi, the Business Executive from the Auditor General. I'm joined by Ms. Michelle Mageman, the Deputy Business Executive from the AGSA as well. I also have Mr. Vusi Maseko, the Senior Manager responsible for the Compensation Fund. That will be the team that is joining the committee this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am. Mr. Sakaza, do we have any guests? And if we do, can they please introduce themselves?
Yes, Chair, I see a lot of names that I can't recognize, so they must be guests.
Can they please indicate to us who they are?
Good morning, Chair.
Which institution they are coming from, their names and their institutions.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Anthony Ometo. I am from PMG covering this meeting.
Thank you. It's quite well. It's something that we'll have to. I will have to check with the office that if guests who have logged in, who are refusing to tell us who they are and which institution they are coming from, what is it that we are to do? Because, and I'll keep on saying this, because if we were physical, people were going to tell us who they are and which institution they are coming from. I really find it a bit disturbing because we're dealing with very important issues. People are going to circulate things that they will allege that were said in the meeting, and we're unable to make them to account because we don't know their names. We don't know which institution they are coming from.
Good morning, Chairperson. My name is Rona Bakker. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor of the National Employers Association of South Africa, NIASA. I'm also joined by my colleague, Mr. Lutandu Nondaba. He's also from the National Employers Association of South Africa, NIASA.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chair. My name is Kabelo Makita. I'm joining the team from the Auditor General together with my colleague, Andrea Kedali.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Maybe let me just, I see most of my colleagues from the AGSA have just joined in now. Let me just try and introduce them. Chilizi. I have a Chilizi. She's the Deputy Business Executive from the AGSA Information System Audit. I also have Mr. Henny Knox, who's also a Senior Manager in the AGSA from the Information System Auditors. So those will be the additional team members of the AGSA that has joined now. And as they come onto the platform, I'll also make sure that I introduce them. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, honorable members. Department led by the Deputy Minister and the Office of the AG. We will now, Deputy Minister, if there is some overview remarks, so that we can then start our business. As members will know that today one of our items of the agenda is that we request to be briefed by the Office of the Auditor General on two of our entities, which are entities that all entities are important, but these are one of our priorities because of their challenges, improvements, and all what is entailed in them. And it is then, as this is also part of our oversight to check if they are doing the right things as prescribed by all the laws and the regulations that governs them. So it's really going to be very important because they are providing a service delivery that is very critical to our people and community at large and workers in particular, which is UIF and compensation fund. I will hand over to the DM to just an overview and then allow the Office of the Auditor General to take us through. DM, if you are still around.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members. Thank you so much. I'm just for now going to talk to the Auditor General's outcomes as it relates to the audit outcomes that is current. Other matters we'll deal with later in terms of the mandate of our department, I think we'll deal with after having presented this report. Yeah. So I think honorable members might want to see me. Honorable Chair, here I am. Good morning, honorable members, DG of our department. I'm going to be very short. If you allow me, honorable Chairperson, I've just switched off my video. That there is better connectivity. I'm not going to be long. I think, honorable members, honorable Chair, I think we have yet received a disclaimer from the compensation fund. And I think that the disclaimer journey and the key qualifications of the past 5 years, I think if we have to go deeper into it, in 2017, honorable members, the fund had 17 key qualifications, and these are listed in the report of the Auditor General. And in 2018, there were 22 key qualifications, meaning that in 2018, we regressed with 5 more additional qualifications from the prior year. And in 2019, there were 15 key qualifications, which means that we improved by reducing 7 qualifications from the prior year of 2018. And in 2020, there were 13 key qualifications. I think there was an improvement by the reduction of 2 qualifications from the prior year of 2019. And in 2021, there were 16 qualifications. I think here we also regressed with 3 more findings from the prior year of 2020. So notwithstanding our disclaimer journey and key qualifications, honorable members, we were not worse off in 2017 than we were in 2018. And this means that in the past year, in the past 5-year period of 2018 was our worst disclaimer of audit, with a total of 22 key findings. And I think if we have to put this into perspective, this happened prior to our time as the 6th administration. But I must also hasten to admit that we are a successor in law, and therefore we cannot say we were not there. Therefore, we have to take full responsibility of what has happened when we were never there, when we were not there. But what we have done to turn the situation around the compensation fund, we have reduced 7 key qualifications in 2019 compared to 2018 prior year. And we further improved by reducing 2 more qualifications from the prior year of 2019. And we dropped the ball, honorable members, we must admit, by regressing with 3 more findings from the prior year of 2020. So, honorable members, honorable Chair, much as this has been a journey of disclaimers and key qualifications, which is unacceptable, it does not mean that there were no improvements at all. And there are instances where we really dropped the ball. We are admitting to that fact. The challenge with improvements in a disclaimer is that at the end of it all, we are still disclaimed, and all our improvements are overshadowed by the outcome itself. Even if there is an improvement here and there, we can't even begin to talk about it because of the overall outcome. So one day when this outcome is finally improved, honorable members, we will be able to refer to all these small improvements, which are actually our building blocks for a better future audit outcome. But we are here now, and we have to face the current disclaimers and deal with every finding and all recurring findings, because I think what is coming out of the report of the Auditor General is this repeat findings as presented to us by the report itself. And a lot of work has been done, but we accept that there is still a lot more to be done to turn the situation around. We just have to appreciate the small improvements and progress. And I hope that we will get there sooner than we anticipate. Honorable Chair, thank you so much for your time. And we will then allow either the DG or whoever from our department was supposed to present, but I think that I'm handing over back to you, Chair, to navigate us through. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, GM. It's the Office of the AG that is going to present today. Over to you, Office of the Auditor General.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chair. I'm just going to try, just bear with me. I think I'm using two devices, but it keeps picking up at different pace. But from the Office of the AG, I think starting with the highlight, the Honorable Deputy Minister already touched on the journey. There's a slide that we wanted to just demonstrate to the committee, the journey with the compensation fund for the past 5 years. We also took a bit of time just to highlight the areas that bother us a lot from the audit perspective. And you would see that we were touching mainly on the key business areas of the compensation fund. But in summary, Chair, for the financial year 2021, in line with the comments from the Honorable Deputy Minister, we had issued a disclaimer of opinion for the compensation fund, primarily because, again, we're still concerned about the supporting documents that needed to be provided, that needed to support the figures and the amounts and all the activities that are tailored in the annual financial statements, including the annual performance report of the compensation fund. So I guess from the AGSA, the key message that we are pushing through to the entity at this point in time is that may we ensure that we have processes in place that facilitate reliable reporting, that make sure that the reporting of the fund is transparent, is reliable, and again, any other assurance provider is able to then agree with the figures that may be reported. One of the highlights that we're putting through is that there's a lot of work that the fund needs to do, obviously, to try and put the measures that will pull the fund forward, but most importantly, to utilize the audit committee and internal audit effectively. Because as it stands, we still think that there's still a big room for the fund to benefit from internal audit in particular and audit committee in particular, mainly because those committees also experience the limitations that we are experiencing, which means that then the fund misses an opportunity to actually benefit from the recommendation that may come ahead of time before the AGSA even gets into the space. You'll see that again, we'll touch on the claims, our biggest pain with the claims. We'll also touch on the investments that are being facilitated by the PIC. And we'll again talk to many other provisions and the liabilities that ought to be reflected and supported accordingly. And again, you'll see the issue of the filing system becoming the crux of the conversation for this morning. So from the AGSA chair, we do appreciate an opportunity that you're allowing us to engage. I would like to allow Michelle to take us through the presentation, and then we'll appreciate the comments and the clarity-seeking questions that may come through as the discussion progresses. With your permission, Chair, may I please allow Michelle to take us through the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chair, and good morning to the honorable members, as well as the DG, the Deputy Minister, and the department. I'm going to take you through the presentation. I'm going to switch off my video as well. I'll switch it back on as we have the discussions. Chair, if you look at this this slide here, it talks about our constitutional mandate that we do strengthen we exist to strengthen our country's democracy by enabling oversight, accountability, and governance in the public sector through auditing and thereby building public confidence. And that is the key why it is important, and we appreciate the invitation today. to provide members with the insights and the outcomes so that you are also able to strengthen your oversight processes. The next presentation, we just gave an overview of the compensation fund in terms of their key operations, which is your employer contributions, which is where your employers need to register with the fund, as well as and then pay for their, in terms of their return on earnings, as well as the medical benefits. This is the payments that are made for any claims, as well as the pensions, benefits, and rehabilitation. This is also claims that are being paid for pensions, as well as the investments. This is the contributions that the fund makes to, or the fund invests via the PIC. If you look at the audit outcomes in terms of the types of opinions that we express, we do express an unqualified with no findings, which means that there are no findings in the financial statements or performance reports or the compliance with legislation. This is the area that we strive to get to. The financially unqualified opinion with findings, meaning that there were errors in the financial statements. However, the entities were able to fix those errors. And there's also findings in the performance, or there's findings in compliance with legislation. A qualified opinion means that there are certain areas in the financial statements that have errors that could not be fixed. And then in terms of the adverse opinion, this means that there are quite a number of errors in the financial statements. And these errors mean that whatever there's a disagreement, so between what is provided to the auditors and what is actually sitting in the financial statements, there are differences. In terms of the disclaimer opinion, it means that in most instances throughout the financial statements, evidence could not be provided to support the amounts that are sitting in the financial statements. So these are the different types of audit opinions that the AGSA expresses. So in terms of the compensation fund, you will see that throughout the years, we have a disclaimer opinion, which has been unchanged. Like the Deputy Minister had already indicated, this is the journey that we also unpacked for the fund to show them from the 2017 year to the 2021, the movements in terms of what are the areas where they could remove from the qualifications, which are the ones that were still remaining. And as you see, that it is key to note that the revenue is still there. So your contributions from employers is still there. Your benefits has been consistent throughout the years, as well as some of the fruitless and wasteful expenditure has been there, as well as the investments has been consistent. And that speaks to some of the key business areas that the fund transacts in. So this is what we wanted to also share with the fund. In terms of the key qualification areas, the revenue from exchange, this is where the fund receives funding from, receives contributions from the employers. In terms of benefits, the payments, this is adequate record keeping needs to be there for the benefits that they pay through. Irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, as well as payables, which speaks primarily to the benefits. So as the benefits are being expensed, there's also the ones that you have not paid yet, which will sit in payables, as well as the provision for the outstanding claims. So where you need to assess whether you need to estimate how much you're going to pay for in the future, we are saying that estimation could not be reliable. I will unpack this a little bit more in the next presentation, which I'm going to start with the revenue from non-exchange transactions and your statutory receivables. So they go hand in hand, the revenue and the receivables element. So this primarily speaks to the earnings that are the earnings that you need to receive from the employer. So the employers need to come and register with the fund. Then the employers need to submit a return on earnings to show that this is how much they've made. This is how many people they have. So all that supporting documentation needs to be there, and then they are charged by the fund. So what we
We have lost
if you
you.
look at the italics at the top, the two paragraphs at the top, have you lost me, Chair?
No, you are back now. I think
Am I-
your network is not stable a bit.
Is it? Okay, let me try, and then you'll just let me know as I'm continuing, and then we'll see what we can do if it continues. In terms of the employer contributions, we said that the fund was unable to provide the underlying supporting documentation to prove that the employers that submitted return on earnings were assessed at the correct rate and class, as the employer's information submitted was insufficient to enable verification of the calculation performed by the fund. So it is important that the return on earnings, the information is kept, and the information contains all the relevant information, for example, for us to determine in which category this employer sits in, for us to then recalculate using the rates that are standard for that type of business, either it's manufacturing or whatever kind of business it is, so that we are able to then utilize the policies and the processes that the fund has to say that this employer sits in this category and this is how much needs to be charged. But for us, it's important that all that information is available for us to be able to recalculate and make sure that what the fund is saying the rate is supposed to be is exactly what the employer has provided the information for. We also noted that the fund did not implement adequate and appropriate controls to address the completeness and accuracy of employer contributions, as some of these employers' rate of returns were not assessed. These deficiencies included the inadequate assessment of the accuracy of information submitted by the employers, inadequate processes to ensure that all employers are registered and assessed at the correct rate and class, and inadequate enforcement of the act for employers not complying with the quota. So it is key that all employers, so we need to make sure that all employers that are sitting as registered with the fund, as well as make sure that the employers, especially the ones that are not registered with the fund, are identified and are made sure that they do submit their return on earnings so that the fund can then invoice them and charge them. We also had a finding in terms of the fund not correctly accounting for revenue earned in the prior year, as that revenue was incorrectly included in the current year. So you'll find that there are instances where some of the employers will provide the information in the current year, but it actually relates to assessments that must be done in the prior year. And in this instance, the standards then require that you need to then go back to a prior year and update your financial statement so that it reflects the amount that you are receiving in the financial statement in the appropriate year that the revenue had incurred. So that is in summary this qualification, and it just mainly talks to how we are making sure that all employers are registered on the fund, and all employers submit their return on earnings, and all employers that have submitted their return on earnings, we are able to categorize them accurately, and then we make sure that we charge them. So this is, in summary, what this area is about. I want to go to the next one in terms of benefits. The next slide on page 8. This one primarily talks to the benefits, and here we're saying that the benefits listing. So for us to be able to even start looking at supporting documentation, we need to even have a listing that says these are all the benefits that we've paid in the current year, and that needs to agree with the financial statements. And in this instance for the fund, we could not get a listing that agrees. We also have another area where we say the future benefits that the fund, or the future claims that the fund will estimate to say this is what we think is going to be charged in the future. We are saying that we could not, the accuracy of the information, the data used to calculate that provision could not be relied on. There was quite a lot of errors or information that was not submitted to be able to say that this calculation is reliable and can be utilized. In terms of payables, in this instance, the fund could not give us the supporting documentation for debtors that have credit balances. So where your debtor has overpaid you, there is a there's then that if the debtors overpaid you, it means that you owe the debtor. But for us to be able to say that, yes, it is true, we need to then recalculate that and get the supporting documentation to say what did you pay them, what did they pay you, and how much is remaining, so that we're able to say that that amount is reliable. In terms of the investments in associates and investments in financial assets and associates, here we're looking at the investments that the fund does make. There was quite a few deficiencies in the information that was submitted for us, and here we're saying to the fund that when we invest, for you to disclose an amount in the financial statements, you would need to look at the cash flows of that institution. You would need to look at the financial statements of that institution. But what's important is that whatever the institution you've invested in, the information that they provide you, you need to make sure that it is complete and accurate, and the amounts there. You can almost say that, yes, you can rely on them to include them in the financial statements. And here we're saying that that data that is coming from those the investment entities, it's not reliable. So you'll have management. In some instances, we did not have information. In some instances, the information that is coming, the fund does not have processes to make sure that that information is accurate and complete for them to even rely on and include in the financial statements. In terms of the prior period, so if you look at the disclaimer journey, there's quite a number of prior period errors that would need to be addressed from the prior year. So when the fund is fixing the prior year amounts, responding to some of the disclaimer items, some of the areas were not attended to, so they were not adequately addressed to make sure that your prior numbers are complete and accurate. In terms of contingencies, here we're talking about possible legal claims, possible securities that the fund would have had. So if they, here you are required to say, this is the summons that we've had, the legal claims that we have, and this is how much is disclosed. In some instances, we could not get the supporting documentation for the summonses that are there, that are disclosed. In some instances, some of the summonses are already sitting as a liability. So the court would have already ruled to say you need to go and pay. Therefore, it needs to move from a contingency then into the financial statements as a liability, because now the case is final and you need to now pay. So it moves from a contingency. So it's not something that's possible. Now it's something that actually needs to happen. So it needs to then sit as a liability. And in some instances, in some cases, these were still included as contingencies. In terms of irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, there's quite a number of irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful cases coming from prior years where there still are not sufficient supporting documentation for us to conclude that the list is complete. Over and above that, there were also instances where we've identified some cases of irregular expenditure that were not included in the register. In terms of the cash flow statement, we had differences in terms of calculations where we could not ascertain what was in reperforming the cash flow statement. In terms of risk management, some of the areas that I have described in the financial statements, we also need to say what are the risks in terms of your financial instruments, which means your debtors, your liabilities, what are the sensitivities, and some of these classes were not adequately allocated as per the standards for the fund to say in my receivables, this is my risk, this is what's happening in the environment, and this is what I need to be alert to in terms of the risks in those areas. In terms of the principal agent relationship, here we're saying that the relationship with your investment corporation was not disclosed in terms of the transactions and how it needs to be disclosed in terms of the standards. Related parties, we also noted that there are transactions with the related parties, especially with the department, where those related party transactions must be agreed with the department, and those transactions must be disclosed in the financial statements, and there needs to be support for those transactions. For performance information, we looked at program 3, particularly for the compensation fund, which comprises of the medical invoices, the high complex cases, and the pre-authorization. And if you look at the measures here, it mainly talks about the days that it takes to finalize these cases. And it is important then that when the fund collects information to be able to report on these targets, that you are able to exactly see when was the medical invoice received and when was the medical invoice then paid, for you to be able to then say, is the for example, medical invoices, are they finalized within the 60 working days? The pre-authorization, is it finalized within the 10 working days? As well as the high complex and medical cases, is that within the 7 working days? And to do that, there needs to be a diligence, because it's a lot of information coming from medical institutions, coming from people claiming. So it's very important that when you are receiving the date, that there's a process in place for collecting this information, so that when you come in as auditors and you say, can I recalculate your 60 days? Can I recalculate your 10 days or your 7 days? You are able then to recalculate that and report it back to, and trace it back to what is reported in the performance report. And in all 3 of these areas, we found that we could not, in some instances, we could not get the information. But if we did get the information, that we could not recalculate the number of days. So that is primarily the main root cause for the performance information in terms of medical invoices. And you'll see that the root cause that we've included there is that there's no proper record keeping within the fund, and not all role players are ensuring that they keep supporting documentation in order to support the target achieved. And the key role players are not reviewing the reported achievement adequately to ensure that schedules are supported by evidence. So here we're saying that 2 things: keep the records, and then make sure that you are reviewing, so that the person that is saying that it is within the 7 days, the person that is reviewing can go and recheck that and make sure that it is correct. And that's what we're saying, that alignment is important between the capturers or the people that are doing the work, as well as especially the reviewers, which is more important, to make sure that the review is happening and they're detecting any errors that are happening. And then the performance management is also happening where somebody is not doing their job as accurately as they're supposed to do it. In terms of compliance with laws and regulations, which is primarily coming from the areas in terms of financial statements and performance information, we still have the financial statements that contained material errors, which is not aligned to the PFMA requirements that financial statement must be complete and accurate. We also had the expenditure management, which speaks to the irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure that was identified. With the next slide, I will be breaking down the irregular expenditure, which I am saying that it is mainly because of the non-compliance with National Treasury procurement processes. But I'll give you the detail in the next slide, as well as fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which talks about the interest that was paid, as well as some of the share of costs and legal costs. And then the next one is on resources. Here we're talking about that some of the late payments on medical invoices, interest was not charged on those. We're saying that the fund must make sure that for the employers that are not paying, you must charge them interest, and you must also go and make sure that you collect the money that is due. And then consequence management, I'll also break it down a little bit in the next slides, where we're saying that disciplinary steps were not taken against individuals that incurred the fruitless and wasteful and irregular expenditure. In terms of the irregular expenditure, and this is the breakdown, the fund did incur about 8 million of irregular expenditure. 5 million of this relates to irregular expenditure that was actually incurred in the previous years, which was identified in the current year, and this was the cancellation of a delivery of air conditions, which we could not see why it was cancelled and in terms of which frame and the reasons, as the contract was already awarded. And then also there was a contract that exceeded the payments value of amounting to about 3 million. But we are saying that, keeping in mind that there's quite a lot of irregular expenditure coming from the prior years that we could not get support for, and there was also completeness issues on the irregular expenditure, the amount of 8 million cannot necessarily say that it is complete and accurate. In terms of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, the fund has incurred about 103 million. And this relates to the fund not paying within the stipulated timeframes. And some of the medical service providers are taking the fund to court. They are requesting their monies, and they're charging interest because of the delay of not paying them. There was also an intercepted payment where payments were made to incorrect beneficiary. And these ones, I will also come to it because it is part of the material irregularity that we have raised with the fund. In terms of consequence management, so the fund, we are saying that there is a process in place for the fund to investigate and to follow up on irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. However, we're not seeing that the end process. So we're not seeing that, yes, we can see that there is investigations happening, but it is not getting to a point where it needs to get to where consequence management is taken or funds are being recovered from whoever the transgressor is. So we did recommend to the accounting authority that they must make sure that these investigations are completed, and then where there's weaknesses in the process, make sure that these weaknesses are addressed in order for these investigations to be finalized. Also, what is key is proper record keeping. So some of the investigations, there's quite a lot of things that happen within it. There's emails going through, there's information being submitted. It is important that all of those things are kept in a file to be able to support the progress of this investigation, and for us to also ascertain where the process this investigation is sitting. And we are also saying that the accounting authority must ensure that appropriate action is taken, that these investigations come to finalization, and they are then attended to in line with the policies of the fund. And also, when disciplinary action is taken, that there is also support for that disciplinary that is taken. In terms of supply chain regulations, here we are highlighting the extension, which also led to the irregular expenditure of contracts without the appropriate approval, which is mainly the National Treasury approval. If you exceed a contract within the limits that National Treasury has given you, it then needs to go to National Treasury for approval, and we did not see that process following through. In terms of the amendment to our Act, Compensation Fund was selected to implement as a phase-in for the implementation of material irregularity. And just for the members, just to refresh the members in terms of what a material irregularity is. So this is where we have a non-compliance with or contravention of legislation, where there's fraud, theft, or breach of fiduciary duties. It must be identified during the audit process under the PAA Act, and it is likely, or it has resulted, or is likely to result in a material financial loss, the misuse or loss of material public resources, or substantial harm to the public or institution or the general public. So this is the definition of material irregularity in terms of how we assess the findings that we have to determine if they meet the definition, and then we issue a notice to the accounting authority to say this is the material irregularity that was raised. So for the compensation fund, we had 2 material irregularities that we communicated to the accounting authority, and this talks to the interest on legal fees and share of costs, where the fund did not pay one of the entities within the 75 days as prescribed by the court. And if you look at the key control that broke down in this instance, it talks to the lack of the recon to make sure that when you have medical invoices, you do your reconciliations against claims, against payments that are already made, so that the fund is able to say, okay, this is actually how much I need to pay, and also making sure that that medical invoice is supported by support to say, yes, this is actually the expenses that were paid for a specific individual, and that was delayed. The court had then said to the fund, you must pay, but that was also delayed. And we're saying that had the processes been done, this interest would not have been charged. In terms of duplicate payments, we also identified that the fund had paid one of the medical service providers, but they had overpaid one of the medical service providers. In this instance, the fund has collected some of the money, but there is still a balance that is outstanding that also needs to be recovered from this medical service provider. So in terms of the notification, the accounting authority did respond to us to say that the investigation will be finalized by the 31 March 2022. So we will then follow up on this once we get confirmation that it has been finalized in April or during even the next cycle of the audit. So in terms of the next part of the presentation, so I've given the background in terms of what are the findings in terms of financial statements performance, as well as compliance with legislation. But as well, what is key is that what are the root causes that the fund would need to deal with to make sure that they overcome. So I've included the key internal control deficiencies that the fund needs to pay attention to make sure that some of these findings don't reoccur. So we are saying that the leadership do not ensure that there's preventative and detective controls in place to ensure reliable reporting and compliance with legislation. And then preventative controls to ensure that there's efficient and effective processes in place to prepare financial statements. So this just talks about the control environment that must be implemented. So from the different divisions within the compensation fund to say, everybody must review, everybody must follow a certain process, which must be effective. So we're saying that the controls must be effective and they must prevent any errors that occur. We are saying that the action plans were not adequately implemented and monitored to ensure that we don't have recurring findings. And in some instances, the action plan is not addressing the root cause. And proper record keeping is one of the key ones to say that in every area of business that is being performed, there must be proper record keeping. So you must have the appropriate document to support what is being in the financial statements. And that must be kept somewhere either somewhere digitally or in filing areas where there's still manual processes being followed. Regular, accurate, and complete financial performance report. We're saying that the fund did not prepare regular and accurate and complete financial statements supported by reliable and credible information. So there was quite a lot of instances where we could not get information. And daily and monthly processing and reconciling of transactions. It is important that this is embedded in the daily activities. So especially when we're working with bulk information, manual information that is coming through, it is very important that these reconciliations and this processing is done daily, as well as the reviewing of these processes and whatever's being recorded is done daily and monthly, because if you leave it for too long with the amount of information that is coming through, it will not be possible for the fund to go through some of these areas. In terms of compliance, monitoring compliance with legislation, once you are looking at, for example, your supply chain processes, making sure that you are monitoring the expenditure that is being incurred, and where you are exceeding, you need to get the relevant authorities to approve, like your National Treasury. And then in terms of internal audit and audit committee, we are saying that some of the information that is submitted to the audit committee is either late or it's not submitted at all. And for the fund specifically, there was no audit committee for about 4 months of the financial year, which was one of the first quarter of the financial year where there was no audit committee. In terms of the IT environment, so some of the findings that we've raised for the fund to look at, to say some of these areas, please make sure they are attended to, because they can cause a few issues in terms of processing information of financial statements. In terms of IT governance, we say that the business case is still outstanding in terms of the objectives of submitting information. The disaster recovery that usually happens, the disaster recovery plan that usually it's happening at the department needs to be finalized, because it does impact the department as well as the entities that are under it, which is compensation fund in this instance. Security management, we did highlight some of the functionalities of users and making sure that there's significant network security within the fund. User access management, making sure that there is a segregation of users and conflicts on the new system, and that there is that user with access to sensitivity of transactions. And then also program change management. So where there's changes that happen within the system, that there's appropriate access there, and the users are assigned with appropriate functions in terms of what their functions are on the system. So we gave them some of the findings in terms of what they need to look at, specifically with the new system that they are implementing. And we also gave the recommendations at the bottom there, that the disaster recovery plan and the business continuity plan must be developed and finalized, and the system administration management should not grant users and consultants access that are not part of the authorization function. And then management should implement measures to ensure that access to these critical functionalities is restricted, and management should investigate the list of users whose activities are not segregated and implement appropriate measures to resolve this discrepancy. And management should monitor and track access to the users' accounts to ensure access is appropriately restricted and controlled. In terms of the recommendations, we did provide recommendations to the fund, including the minister as well, that there is still an urgent need to review the control environment of the fund, including the role of management, and subsequently strengthen the preventative and monitoring controls to identify deficiencies early and react appropriately. Monitoring the adherence to controls must be enforced proactively, and where there is transgressions, actions must be taken, and the root causes identified must be responded to timelessly. And then implement regular and adequate review controls over financial performance reporting to ensure that errors are timelessly detected and corrected, and consequence management must be implemented and monitored on transgression. So I think the first recommendation is the key one. We did communicate it last year. So the review of the control environment is definitely key in terms of how the divisions and the provinces work within the fund, as well as how information is then collated to head office. And then also, what is the requirement between financial statements as well as business, so that those gaps are also closed, so that financial statements are also prepared according to the framework. For the committee, we are suggesting, Honorable Chair and members, that if you could obtain the reports detailing the progress made by the compensation fund on the review of the control environment. Also, if the committee can also obtain the investigation reports from the fund to confirm that investigations are adequately conducted, the root causes are addressed, and the employees that caused the irregularities identified and action is taken against them. And where there was a financial loss, the financial loss must be recovered, and also monitor that consequence management is implemented to transgressors. Honorable Chair, that is all from my side in terms of the outcomes for the fund and the recommendations. I will then hand over to Khabo, the BE, maybe if just to wrap up the presentation. Khabo.
No, that's fine, Michelle. I think we covered it all. Chair, may we then just appreciate the inputs from the committee and any questions if they come through. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Business Executive. Honorable members, there is the presentation. Any questions?
I have it, Michael Bagram.
Number one, hands. I see Honorable Dana, Honorable Mkondo, Honorable Mdabe. Okay, it's Honorable Bagram, Honorable Mkondo, Honorable Dana, then Honorable Mdabe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I go ahead?
Yes, you may.
Thank you to the Auditor General staff. They've done a fantastic job, and I know that it's hard work. I must tell you up front, I know nothing about accounting, so I apologize if my questions sound a bit odd, but the reality is that you've got an expanded mandate. That expanded mandate has now been in place for over a year, I think almost 2 years. Well, what now? We've seen this for, I think there's been a failure for 10 years, and what are you going to do about it? The ball is in your court. The Parliament gave you the power, and I want to know what the Attorney General is going to do about it. The Auditor General, sorry. The next thing is, there seems to be so many disclaimers, and especially with medical invoices, the Minister keeps telling us that there is fraud and some claimants are defrauding the fund and all this sort of thing, where we don't see much prosecution, but maybe it emanates from the fund itself not being able to actually run itself properly, and maybe you can comment on that. The next thing is, if in fact we're seeing all these disclaimers and we're having the same stuff repeated year after year, that probably explains the public or keep complaining about the productivity, the turnaround time, the payment of invoices. They keep complaining about all that. Maybe it stems from the inability to run their own office. And maybe you could comment on that. You commented also on consequence management and the lack of disciplinary hearings. Probably the same people are causing the same problems, and maybe we should actually have, this is the Department of Employment and Labour. They should know by now how to run disciplinary hearings, so one hopes that they can. Then finally, our courts, the High Court has on a few occasions now actually made officials, government officials, pay personally for legal costs. Maybe we should explore that as well. So thank you very much for that report. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Honorable Mkondo.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to you, Chair, honorable members. the Deputy Minister, the DG and his team, our guests. Chair, I welcome the presentation. Chair, under normal circumstances, moving from disclaimer to qualified, from qualified to unqualified, from unqualified to clean audit, under normal circumstances, it takes 3 years, 3 to 4 years. But listening to the presentation, there is no will at all in the compensation fund. Chair, we will never get out of this situation. There is no will at all. That's my analysis, Chair. And you always talk, Chair, about our legacy and integrity as this committee. What will people say about us when we are not here as members of this committee? What are the changes that we are bringing to this department and its entities? Chair, the compensation fund is disservicing us. Our name will be in very, very bad books of history. So, Chair, that is why I am saying, according to my analysis, for the Auditor General not to be appraised with the record keeping, to me, it is done intentionally, because there are things that have to be hidden from them. I found out during the presentation, I concluded that the internal audit and the audit committee, I can say, Chair, they are sidelined. And the reason why they are sidelined, I don't understand. And the evidence of wasteful and irregular expenditure is held intentionally. And the issue of disciplinary actions not taken, Chair, this is just a stagnant train. It is not moving. Mina, Chair, my suggestion will be that I think we need to change this engine. Before the presentation of slide 15, I was about to say, maybe we must have a forensic audit. But Chair, slide 15 told me that there is no forensic audit that is needed. The only thing that we need here is to change this engine. This engine is not moving. It will never help us. And people, those who have to go to jail must go to jail for whatever they have stolen from this fund. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I go ahead?
Yes, Honorable Dana, sorry for that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, though it reads like a horror story. Chair, I have a question with regards to employer contributions. And we've had confirmation from Inspection and Enforcement Services of the department that they have 1,000 inspectors looking after about 2 million employers. The Compensation Fund's annual report for 2020-2021 reported return on earnings assessments received were 220,000. So that's about 10% of the reported 2 million employers in the market. So keeping that in mind, the Auditor General believes that there have been a 48% completion rate of return on earnings for 2021. That would be then, if it's 220,000, then there's about 459,000 active employers for 2019. Yet the Compensation Fund reported to us, to this committee, that there was a 99% achievable rate on this item, as they calculated their 220,000 on 223,000 employers that were registered. So what I would like to know is, are there 223,000 registered employers on the books, of which 220,000 were completed,
Or are they in excess of 450,000 employers on the books? And what about the rest of the 2 million employers in the market? Where are the rest of them? I know everyone doesn't have to register with the compensation fund, but there can't only be 200,000, 10% or 450,000. So what I would like to get to is the quality of data presented by the compensation fund to this committee so we can do our oversight. Because if they don't present quality data to the Auditor General, who says that we get quality data so we can do our proper oversight? I'm very worried about that, Chair, because there are huge discrepancies in what we are receiving that we are supposed to do oversight on. And I would like to add to Honorable Nkonto what she just said. I would like to know, because I attended the SCOPA meeting last week. I don't know how many of the other members of the committee attended, but Chair, I saw that you also attended the meeting. And I would like to know, compared to that meeting, where is the outrage in our committee about what is presented to us and about the quality of oversight that we are able to do? Because I'm not sure if we're getting the correct data here, and I'm very worried about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dana. Honorable Ndabe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to the honorable members, the Deputy Minister, the DG, and all the management, the Office of the Auditor General. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity, Chair. The report, Chair, we are welcoming it. I just want to get clarity on one or two things from the Auditor General. Last week or week before, we were presented with the progress report in terms of the audit plan implementation. I would like to know whether the Office of the Auditor General was part of the developing identification and identify the challenges that would then inform the audit action plan. If they were, had they agreed on the progress or the timelines in terms of its implementation and the progression thereof? Secondly, Chair, it's the issue of whether Auditor General's office, after having disclaimed the compensation fund for 5 years, have they then looked at skills audit in the compensation fund, both at senior management level, middle management, and middle management level? I'm raising these questions, Chair, of clarity, in the context that when we were presented, which was one of our recommendations as well in the portfolio committee when we're deliberating on the either 1920 or financial audit outcomes, that in the development of the action plan, they should therefore then involve the Auditor General's office. Now, the outcomes here on the 2021 audit outcomes does have some deficiencies that one would say they lack periodic interventions prior to the development of the annual financial statements. But I might be corrected because this analysis is based on what was then presented to us. If my memory serves me well, Chair, was that the audit action plan, its implementation has achieved over 50%. I can't recall of the exact percentage that we were given. but it was above 70%. Now, if that statement was correct, therefore the audit outcome would not be an adverse one in the manner that is being presented to us, or it has been the outcome of the audit. If I may pick on one or two things that really disturbed us, it's the issue of withholding information to governance structures. You know, if somebody intentionally withhold information for you to perform your task, it's a crime. Therefore, it would require drastic measures to be taken to deal with a particular issue. Over and above that, then you render the structure that has to perform that task ineffective. If we were to bluntly say, you render them useless. Now, it's a serious concern to me, but it's a matter that I think the portfolio committee would have to deliberate. But I just want these issues to be clarified, maybe from the AG's point of view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, honourable members. Honourable Nonsel.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Sorry, before that, I would request members to lower their hands, those that have asked questions, please. You may continue, Honourable Nonsel.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. I'm saying I hope I'm audible because I've had serious connection problems, hence my late connection. I am also apologizing for that, and thanks for the admin support that they have been able to help me to resolve the problem. Chair, let me greet the entire team led by the Deputy Minister, and also great colleagues, that is the honorable members, and also great the team led by the business executive, that is from the Office of the Auditor General. Chair, I in appreciation of the presentations made, my question is just a question of clarity that arises from slide 18 with regard to supply chain management. I might have missed if there was a clarity made, but I just need a clarity which the team can help clarify. Because there's a qualification there that says all supply chain management findings should be investigated. That relates to all the negative aspects that have been highlighted, including the extension of contracts without proper approval and so on. The question, therefore, is whether, for instance, the kind of, if maybe the AG team can just elaborate as to what form of investigation, or are they asking the department or the entity to engage on? Will it be an internal, or should it be, in fact, an external? But I don't want to preempt. I just want to get clarity on that point. Otherwise, on the earlier points that have been raised by colleagues, I think I'm comfortable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Nonsel. Business executive, I've just got some two clarities that I would like to speak on. One is, I'm of the understanding that you may have an interaction with the internal audit, the internal audit committee. And if you had that interaction with them, what was their response on these issues that you have picked up in this entity, which it's my understanding that the Internal Audit Committee is from time to time alert the leadership of on whatever red, black spots that they are picking up. That's number one, which then makes me, in terms of the Internal Audit Committee, is that in line with what I think it's Honorable Mugabe, when he was talking about skills, what is it that you may have picked up? I'm raising this question because I'm finding it as an outsider now. I'm finding it a bit difficult to really understand that when you had what is called an internal audit committee, you have an institution or an entity that will have some of these grave areas that have been identified by you. That's number one. Number two, I will be interested to know. Please clarify to me, and feel free to indicate that I may be ignorant in particular on what I am going to ask. It's my understanding that any institution will have people that are specializing on whatever area. Case in point here, if you can go to the slide that talks about IT, was in my understanding, IT system is the make and break of whatever institution. Two clarities around the issues of IT, if they're not going to be three. One, the issues that you have picked up, is it issues that you have picked up on your own as people that are dealing with rents and cents, or do you have IT specialists in the AGs, in the institution, who then, in my understanding, will have the ability and the capacity to go deeper and then be able to pick up some of the things that a person who's dealing with rents and cents may not, as much as you are IT literate, but specialists have got that ability. So what you have picked up, is it what you have picked up on your own, or you have also invited your IT specialists to come and have a look? I'm raising this because I may have missed it. My apologies. Even when I go to your report, your report in particular on IT is not reflecting that they are coming from they've migrated to a new system. And in terms of IT, these are the issues that are being picked up. That is why my question on IT specialists. I'll just make an example why I'm raising this is because in my other deployment, when it was said the information is unreliable and it's what other areas are missing, and I asked, but what is it? What is it? Where did you made this? No, we made the audit in the children's ward, and we couldn't find the vaccination, whatever, the cards. And I said, but you'll never get those. Those are with parents. And as a result, those are always, it's like an ID of a child, because wherever a mother moves around, go to the clinic, go to the doctor, she must always have that, or he must always have that as a parent. And I at that time, I then said, I think it will be advisable that at least you have people who have got who are specializing in some of these sectors very well as auditors. Maybe that is a discussion on another time. But for me, in particular, an entity that has migrated from an old system to develop another system, IT is involved, and therefore the IT specialist, I would think that they may have to have a role. If you can clarify me that, is it the outcome of that process, or is it only the outcome of yourselves? And if it is the outcome of yourselves, didn't you see it necessary to also involve the IT people? When you pick up some of these, all these issues that you are raising, my understanding is that you should sit down with the department and engage. In that engagement, have you obviously, I would, with the knowledge that I had in other areas where I was deployed, that there will be areas where you will have serious disagreement with the institution. They will put their case, and you will also put your case, and there will be areas where you agree. There will be areas of improvement, and in moving forward, you'll monitor that. I'm raising this business executive because, like any other person, we are a bit frustrated and I don't want to say confused, but it's something that we really don't. Maybe it's something that we are to express now, our feelings. So my questions, they are bordering into that at the end, these are the issues that I think now we may from my side, I should then ask to get clarity on, and then be able to understand in us moving forward. So the number of questions that have been asked, President, the planning action asked by Honorable Mugabe, your interaction with them, I'm not going to repeat that. We will then hand over to you, executive, business executive, to respond to the questions that we have asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Appreciating the comments and the inputs from honorable members. Let me pick from the first question around the Public Audit Act amendment, and in particular, the introduction of the material irregularity that would not have been there, that allows the Auditor General to take certain matters further. And I just want to highlight slide number 20 in particular. If you look at slide number 20, ordinarily we would not have had that particular slide if it wasn't for the material irregularity amendment that would have been given over to the AGSA. Which would mean that ordinarily we would have said, look, compensation fund, there seems to be a financial loss, but we would not have had any right, in particular, to issue a notification to the accounting officer. But in this sense, we had an opportunity to do so, particularly because the Act had given us the mandate and the ability to do that. So you would see that in the compensation fund, we are beginning to start to lay out material irregularities that we are identifying. And it's a totally new space that we would not have had in the past. But with that said, it is worthwhile to note that even how the Act is amended, it did not leave the entire mandate for the AGSA. In fact, it did not allow the AGSA to override an accounting officer or override oversight structures in any how. It actually emphasized the importance of, again, the combined assurance provision. And it would say that even when you do identify material irregularity, you have a responsibility not to override the PFMA, and therefore you ought to say to the accounting authority or accounting officer that please go investigate these matters because the PFMA asks you to do that. Only if accounting officer or the accounting authority refuses, or rather investigate for the sake of it on a platonic level, that we are then allowed to go a step further and say, do we take it and investigate it, or do we refer it to the investigating bodies? Therefore, from the Act perspective, Chair, it was deliberate that the AGSA does not override the investigating bodies and does not override the accounting authority, because then it will nullify the provisions of the PFMA. So what I'm emphasizing there is that, yes, there are material irregularities that the AGSA started to introduce in line with the amendment that is sitting in the Public Audit Act, but the responsibility for the accounting authorities still sits, and again, the responsibilities for all other investigating bodies, including the oversight structures, still remain intact. And therefore, as the AGSA, we're still asking that for us to get maximum benefit from that particular amendment, then everybody in the chain really need to close the gap in terms of their responsibilities. And I just want to take that particular question with a question that came and said, we were asking that the accounting authority perform an investigation on irregular expenditure. And what did we envisage in mind? And what we are asking there is primarily what the PFMA is emphasizing, that if you identify one, the PFMA will say prevent irregular expenditure, meaning thou shalt not have irregular expenditure. But in instances where things happened and for some particular reason, the control deficiency occurred and the irregular expenditure was incurred, the PFMA goes further to say investigate. And therefore, the recommendation of the AGSA, it's actually emphasizing that part, that now that you incur irregular expenditure that you should not have incurred, please do the investigation with the intention that should the accounting authority refuse, the step in the next audit is to say, now that you refused, then we need to be referring it to the investigating bodies herself as part of the mechanisms that the Public Audit Act made available to us. There was a question again that says the claims around the claims deficiencies, there seems to be an indication that the fund is not run properly. From the AGSA perspective, we are saying what we are seeing in the compensation fund is not ideal. And hence we are emphasizing the importance of a review the internal control environment. It's just not ideal that it makes it difficult for any assurance provider that comes from outside the entity to provide an assurance that says you can rely on the figures and the activities that are being reported. And that would mean that if you go to the PFMA again, that says that from the accounting authority perspective and management, there's a responsibility for us to do risk assessment and prevent any control, then the compensation still needs to pick up on that particular element and make sure that they strengthen the control environment. So yes, there's a big room for improvement around the claims management in particular, not only claims investment, claims area, but all other aspects of business that we highlighted in our report that we were not able to express an opinion on. And I'm also combining it with the question that came, I think from Honorable Mdabe, if I'm not mistaken, that talks to the fact that if you don't provide information, you are actually indirectly running the any institution or oversight structure a bit useless. And as much as we may not necessarily is a bit useless, yes, you're not getting the full benefit of all other oversight structures, including the audit in itself, because the external audit was meant to also give indication that all the things that you are reporting, they've taken place in the manner that you are highlighting, and again that the figures can be relied upon so that the decision making is facilitated by reliable reporting. So with the compensation fund, the fact that the AGSA is saying I can't express an opinion because The disclaimer of opinion is exactly that I can't give you an opinion because you would not have given me enough information to arrive at a conclusion, which then makes it a bit difficult for us as the AGSA to say, are your figures even correct or they are not correct? Because we know for a fact that we would not have had the transparency that we require for us to then express our view in line with the international auditing standard. So there again, from the compensation fund, the biggest improvement that needs to happen would be the record keeping. And I'll tally it, Chair, with the question around where there are disagreements, where you engage management. Yes, we do engage management, and there may be disagreements where they feel otherwise. But the thing about it is that it is not only an engagement, everything that you're disagreeing on ought to be supported. So it's really not so much reliant mainly on your verbal communication, meaning we are sitting in an engagement and you believe that the finding may not be correct. We say, okay, if it's not correct, then there has to be evidence that supported the particular figure or the particular reported target that would have been reflected in the annual performance report or the annual financial statement for that matter. And I think it's on that basis that we keep emphasizing as the AGSA that the audit is evidence-based. And unless the evidence is in line with the accounting standards, you will struggle actually to disagree just on the basis of engagements and a meeting and anything along those lines. I think Honorable Mkondo just highlighted the comments. We've noted that. Thank you for those observations. Honorable Diana, I think you had a question around the employer contribution. And I'm going to allow the team just to touch on it. But the biggest part I want to highlight is that the crux of the disclaimer is exactly that any figure that the compensation fund is putting forward, as the AGSA, we cannot be able to support it. And at the same time, it makes it difficult when you don't give me adequate evidence to then quantify in terms of how much this should be. But we also know that there would have been instances where there are other employers that may not have been considered. And to that extent, we would highlight it as a control deficiency. But I would like Michelle and Vos in particular to just give you more perspective to that so that you can get the full context to it. There's a question around, was the AGSA part of the action plan? I'm going to ask the Michelle, let me give Michelle an opportunity to just close it out around that area. You also had a question, Chair, in particular around our interaction with internal audit. And yes, we do interact with internal audit, but we don't only do that because audit is evidence-based. We also indulge a bit in terms of the reports that they would have been issued. And that's where we could pick up that there are instances where internal audit themselves would not have been given the information that they required, or it would have been given to them a bit late that they may not have been able to assist pronto. So from our observation in particular, we still believe that for compensation fund to really get the maximum benefit of internal audit function in particular, that also then supports the audit committee, there has to be the submission of reliable information that enable that particular function to also close their observations and their recommendations accordingly. As it stands, I don't think that can comfortably say that they've been given an opportunity for them to put through all the recommendations that ordinarily committees of their nature would ought to be providing to the fund. So an area of improvement again, the first part is to support internal audit and make sure that they're given everything that they need on time, so that they're able to provide the recommendation and suggestion ahead of time for management to implement, such that by the time audit from the AGSA comes, some of these things are already remedied and they're closed, and the internal control deficiency already improved along those lines. And again, you would have noticed that we highlighted the audit committee that would not have been there for 4 months. And from the PFMA perspective, is very clear. The entity is required to have a functional audit committee throughout the financial year. Now, there was a question around whether we do the skills audit. We don't, right? We don't as the AGSA, and we just around the skills in terms of Yes, you have the let's say the qualification as an example, but you are not necessarily, your qualification is not necessarily showing up in the work that you are doing. That we leave it to the accounting authority. Obviously, if they require assistance, they'll contact your DPSA and your PSC along those lines. But what we will do as the AGA is that if you do have new people that you just employed, we'll go through the process of how you appointed them. And if it so happens that the advertisement that you had and the qualification of the person that you brought through in the system, there's a disjuncture around those two, will highlight it. But in terms of determining whether the compensation fund is well skilled, that remains the responsibility of the accounting authority for them to close it up. Chair, you had a question around do we use specialists, or that particular slide on IT, is it really just from the top of our head? So within my team in particular, I would have a couple of skills, and that's typical of the AGSA. So when we go to an audit, depending on time and depending on the nature of the entity itself, you would determine the types of auditors that must form part of that audit team. And for the compensation fund in particular, yes, we had the IT specialist. And I think in my introduction, I was trying to highlight two of my members that are on the call as well. And that's just to make sure that on an area that's as specialized as IT, we get a person that specializes in that particular aspect to unleash all the observations, and most importantly, make sure that the recommendations can assist the fund in moving forward. So the findings that you are seeing there, or the observations that you are seeing there, they're not necessarily coming from my team of that financial auditors. In a nutshell, they actually come from the IT specialists that form part of the AGSA. They are the employees of the AGSA, yes, in the main, and they would make sure that for all the auditees, not just for the compensation fund, where we have a specialized IT environment, that they give us the insights of what's coming out of play. So you would not necessarily be seeing the findings merely from the financial auditors only. And I think around the IT findings, maybe just to close it up as well, what you are seeing would have been the evaluation of the current system that they're working with. So we are no longer really relaying the issues around umehluko per se. I think we've raised those ones in the past, but we're focusing on the systems that are aimed to then facilitate the compensation fund going forward. And I think this aspect is where you say, look, I think if we continue to do what we need to be doing and make sure that all the things that used to come from umehluko never show up, and all the findings that are showing up now, they make sure that they're embedded properly in the control value chain, then the compensation fund as a first step should be able then to have a proper mission to move forward. So Chair, if I could just pause here, I'm going to allow my team an opportunity just for them to also emphasize on some of those questions as well. And then we'll step back a bit. Thank you so much. Michelle, you may go ahead.
Thank you, PE. From my side, I will touch on the CIP, the employees that are registered with the fund in terms of the benefits. And here, as the Honourable Member Dana had already also alluded to, is that we also could see differences in terms of what was assessed, how many are active and how many are registered, and trying to see what should be there and what should not be there. But what we can say is that there's definitely an indication that there are employers that are not registered with the fund that should be followed up on. So there definitely is that indication. How much that is, we cannot necessarily get to, and that is the crux of of the qualification area, to say the fund needs to have a process in place to say who's out there in the market, are they registered, are they submitting return on earnings, and are they being calculated and invoiced, and that is a key area that we just need to the fund needs to work on. In terms of the action plans, as the B already indicated, definitely we do give input in the action plans, and we look at it from our own observations. But what is key is that the monitoring of that action plan and making sure that it is being implemented. And when you're monitoring, that's where, if you look at the compensation fund with its various offices and the type of information that they're looking at and the evidence that they're looking at. It is important that when you're monitoring this, you say, is what we have as an action addressing the root cause, or is there a new root cause that is actually coming up, or the real root cause is actually coming up once you start implementing? So that monitoring is very key. And that monitoring to say what is happening on business, so on the ground in terms of benefits and processing of claims, and what is actually filtering up to get into the financial statements and making sure the recording of the financial statement is according to the standards. And that gap also would need to be monitored and addressed. So we do give inputs. We spend time with the compensation fund and to look at whether the action plan is there. But that monitoring and implementation is the key component in that area. And also just looking at the control environment, because once you're monitoring, you can also see what is it that's lacking in the whole control environment to be able to close some of the gaps that are there. If it's a skills gap, you can also assess it from that end as well. So that is the key element for that. I think, Khabo, you've covered in terms of the internal audit area that I needed to cover. So I think that is all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I hand over back to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Business Executive, for the presentation. If just one question, I think is the question that I asked in one of your presentations, and sometime that how do you audit the national office, and then I think the response was that you don't go to provinces, but you sample them. I understand the issue of COVID. I think it was before COVID. I would and you will reflect to me if I'm again maybe a bit off here. Because my understanding is that provinces are having a compensation fund unit or offices. And will it not be at some point, not now, you'll sleep over it to think that for you to, even if you pilot 1 or 2 provinces, to go and audit there, if I can say, physical auditing. Don't you think that is will really assist in us and really trying to really unpack all these challenges, because we may be looking at the national office fine because that's where the big guns are and where the work is being channeled to. But that work that is being channeled to the head office, is it the work that is then, that information, is it the information that is in order, and then will then assist the head office? That's why I'm saying you may not respond to it now, you may sleep over it, but yeah, I think it's some of the things that I would have an interest on. And I think that was for the compensation fund. The next one is UIF. Mr. Sakaza, am I correct? Mr. Sakaza?
No, Chair, to my understanding, they only were focusing on CF today, Chair. They sent a presentation only for CF today.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Business Executive. Let's appreciate, because you are forever willing to come and take us through. We may We may call you back. Remember that from time to time, compensation fund keep us on our toes together with the UIF. But for now, the focus is on compensation fund. And if there is a need, we will call you back again. And I know for a fact that I always communicate with you at times at the very late hour. But what I do appreciate is that when you are not going to come, you tell us, you tell the office straight. And when you are available, you really avail yourself. And that assists us in the oversight that we are conducting in terms of the department and its entities. Thank you very much. If you want to remain and be part of the next presentation by the department, it's up to you. You are welcome. If you want to leave, you feel free to do that. Thank you very much, and your team, PE. Thank you very much. DG, now it's over to you. Are people still in the house?
We are, Chair.
Yeah, yes,
We are here,
yes,
Chair.
Chair.
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, I'm assuming that we're moving into the next presentation.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Sam Rotoba to run through the presentation. Mr. Rotoba.
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, the Deputy Minister, my colleagues. I'm going to ask Matapelo to share the screen. Honorable Chairperson, I'm going to cover a number of areas as discussed internally. If you can move to the next slide. I will touch on some background just for the information of honorable members, briefly on some of the definitions that we grappled with around labor, employment, and this is something that is not unique. It's something that all ministries of employment and labor within the ILO continue to grapple with. Hence, our names are also different. In other areas, we have employment and social affairs, employment and labor, manpower development, and so on and so on. Like we were before, we used to be called Manekrach or manpower development, and over the years, the names have changed. And if you go to neighboring countries, ministries of labor and employment also have different names. So I'll touch on that one. The current mandate, the employment context, some of the interventions that we are having on employment from the different entities of the department, and deal with the question of the plans that we wanted us to talk on, and some concluding remarks. If you can move on to the next slide. Now, just a bit of history. We used to have a branch called Employment and Skills Development Services. That was the biggest in the department, and even in the olden days, and after 1994, when the measure of the former TBVC states and the self-governing territories occurred, all the manpower developments of the various departments in the Transkei Ciskais, when they were amalgamated into the Department of Employment, it became the biggest section of the department with the biggest budget, because at the time we had skills development or manpower development, as it was called. Now, changes occurred in 2010 when the branch was split, the skills development component was transferred to the higher education department, and only employment component remained. And as we had a
We have lost him. DG. DG, can you please?
Services Act in 2014. You can move on to the next slide. Should I proceed, Honorable Chairperson?
Yes, I don't know whether it was me. We lost you for some seconds. I'm not quite sure whether it's your network. You may continue.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. The President on the 29th of May announced that announced the new ministers of Employment and Labor. And during the State of the Nation address, the President talked about a new department that will further coordinate all government efforts to create jobs and reduce unemployment. And by extension, it meant that the department will be required to change its approach from policy development, compliance enforcement, to facilitate
DG,
programs, etc. And the department this Monday.
Sorry, Mr. Morotov. You know, when we were in SCOPA, members of SCOPA were a bit, I don't want to say, they were a bit irritated, lacking of a better word, that you keep on, that there were, at times you lose the presentation. I would appreciate, DG, if that can be attended to, so that when we lose him, somebody quickly come in. That's why I'm saying I don't know whether it's on my side, because I keep on losing him. Can members indicate if they're also experiencing the same thing?
The same problems to all of us.
Yes, Chair. Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Can please DG try and if it's the issue of network and whatever, can you please look into attend to that? He may continue. Are you still with that, Mr.
Is it much better?
Continue, Mr. Morotov.
Is it much better?
Yes, I hear you. Mr. Morotoba?
Now, Honorable Chairperson. Chairperson.
You may continue.
Okay. I think Sam seems to be explaining. Are you ready, Sam?
Yes, I can hear you on my side. I don't know, but
okay.
Everyone, when should I proceed?
Yeah, please
okay,
proceed.
If I get cut off, you will take over.
I'll take over, yes.
Thank you. Next slide, Mema Tapen. If you can move on to the next slide. Can we move to the next slide, Metepel? Or give me control of the
What's happening now?
You know
I
what?
think some you've
I
been
wanted
signed,
the,
you've been
can the
call
DG
rights.
take over?
Okay. Chair, I'm taking over.
Take over. Yes.
So from the previous slide, Chair, we were just indicating what the president has indicated and what was the understanding of our mandate. We then simply decided that it's important that we go and review our mandate as an institution, given the amplified employment mandate. So in the exercise of review the mandate, we agreed that our mandate should now be striving for a labor market that is conducive to investment, economic growth, employment creation, and decent work. And if you look at the previous one, you'll see that there's a slight change. If you go to the mission, also change it a little bit. Now, our mission is to promote employment and regulate the South African labor market to ensure sustainable economic growth through appropriate legislation and regulations, inspection and enforcement, protection of workers' rights, provision of employment services, promoting equity, and provision of social protection and social dialogue. Next slide. Matapelo, next slide. In the next slide, what we are saying is that we're defining our role and the role of the department and its entities. We have a number of branches of the department: labor market policy, public employment services, inspection and enforcement services. And we have the entities, that is compensation fund, UIF, CCMA, productivity SA. We have the supported employment enterprises. They all have a role to play in translating our vision into real programs that are aimed at employment creation, employment preservation, employment promotion, employment security, employment access, and employment retention. So in the next slide, we're showing you the summary of the employment services that we offer in the department, including our entities. We have a public employment services, which mandate is to make sure that they develop an employment services system that will enable us to register work seekers and also register opportunities, and also provide the full suite of vocational services, including employment counseling, matching and placement, designated PWD work subsidies, that's people with disability, and also deal with the labor migration management and employment policy development. And that's the work that the branch is currently seized with. We have the inspection enforcement services. Here, I'd like to amplify the occupational health and safety aspect of it. We want to make sure that we keep people in employment. And by doing so, we're helping companies to ensure that the need for them to hire new people and retrain them as a result of having, lost employees due to contraction of occupational disease or injuries. That's the contribution that occupational health and safety makes in employment. It's in the preservation of employment and make sure that people are kept employed. Compensation fund, in an event that an injury or a worker has contracted an occupational disease, that fund is there to make sure that claims are being paid. But most importantly, recently we added a new twist to it, the work that the fund is doing. We added disability and rehabilitation, you'll see in the presentation as we go along how that contributes to employment. Because with unemployment insurance fund, they pretty much with the amendment of the Act, they included a provision where the fund can support employment creation and employment preservation. Next slide. Matabelo, next slide. So the next slide, what you're seeing is the CCMA, the role that the CCMA is playing. The CCMA has been, besides the fact that they deal with labor disputes, they've been involved in the employment side of things. But most importantly, the work that they do is critical in the sense that for employment, for investment and economic growth to take place, you need a stable labor market. And they, through the work that they do, they assist in making sure that that labor market, the stable labor market is there. But most importantly, they help instances where there are retrenchments. You will see as we go down, the number of jobs that they've saved through the mediation processes that that they provide. But also, they're part of the temporary employee relief scheme that is aimed at assisting employers who are experiencing financial difficulties, and they assist in the adjudication of those claims so that the unemployment insurance fund can assist them. In that area, they work with the Productivity South Africa. We have NEDLAC, of course, they are responsible for social dialogue. They strive to promote the goals of economic growth, participate in economic decision-making and social equity. And I'm sure honorable members must have heard the president announcing during the State of the Nation address the discussions that are currently ensuing at NEDLAC with respect to the review of the labor market policies in as far as they affect small business. So that's the work that NEDLAC is busy with. Next slide. The next slide is on the supported employment enterprises. This again highlights the work that they do in supporting disabled people and making sure that with the work that they do, they're able to, absorb a number of disabled people in their factories. The next one is the labor policy and industrial relations. This is a branch that is responsible for all our labor market policies. Of course, they table them at NEDLAC, and they are again seized with the issue of making sure that we reduce the regulatory burden on the side of the small business. They will be undertaking that discussion at NEDLAC as announced by the president. Next slide. This next slide is an indication of the interventions that we have and how we work with the different role players in as far as employment is concerned, in terms of interventions that government has. We work with the Jobs Fund. We're now working with also the GTEC in facilitating the pathway management. We actually appointed GTEC to enable us to do this work, and in turn, they interact with other service providers. They've also appointed the innovation fund to make sure that they interact with the role players in terms of Harambe and other pathway management network players. Employment tax incentive. This has been around for quite some time. It also reduces the labor cost for employers, especially as they absorb young people. So this instrument has been there for quite some time and is proving to be working. The Public Employment Investment Corporation, job creation interventions, they work with both UIF and the Compensation Fund. That's where we invest resources to what we call social responsibility investment. And certainly with the discussion that we had with the AG, we've decided that this is no longer viable given the state of some of the companies that PIC has invested in on our behalf, and the burden of having to account for the activities of these entities when we don't have full control, and the difficulties of getting audited financial statements and all the other problems that are associated with this. We have taken a decision that both funds will cease to invest in those, but there are other areas where PIC is investing and in ensuring that jobs are created. We also work with the Industrial Development Corporation, where we allocate funding to them specifically to make sure that jobs are created. We work with small enterprise finance agencies, and again, UIF investment with the IDC. The Public Employment Services, which is the internal work in the department. We have a labor activation program, as we'll see as we go along. What is it that they do? We also part of the Presidential Youth Employment Initiatives and the Extended Public Works Program, the Youth Employment Services. We're part of the coordination of all these activities to make sure that the money allocated to the departments between ourselves and the PMO in the presidency, we make sure that there's proper coordination in terms of reporting, to make sure that indeed those jobs that were meant to be created are created. The next slide. Here we're showing the examples of public employment programs. We have the labor activation program, which was created as a result of its creation was enabled by the Section 48(1) of the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and also Section 18 of the UIF Act, and also Section 5D of the Employment Insurance Amendment Act, which indicates that the fund must be used for financing of the retention of contributors in employment and the re-entry of contributors into the labor market, and any other scheme aimed at vulnerable workers. So that's the instrument that we're using. And in the next slide, you'll also see how LAB works. The objectives of this program are to enhance employability through the training of the unemployed and the placement of those young employed in employment, enable entrepreneurship through enterprise development. We've got quite a number of projects that are running in this regard. Preserve jobs, temporary employee relief scheme at CCMA for distressed companies and business re-engineering process or turnaround solutions, which is done at Productivity South Africa. So here is just an indication of what we've been doing. So the total number of people that are part of the project now, as we speak, is 59. Once we finalize the 6,660, we will have 59,000 people that will be engaged in the projects. Currently, we have a project that is running in KZN that I can make mention of. Quite a number of them are running, but I want to make mention of this one in KZN, which will be launched by the minister on the 4th of March, where 19,000 young people were trained and they started their own co-ops, and they are currently trading. And that's a very successful project. The second one is in the Eastern Cape, where you have young people engaged in digital training. Already they're working with a small business to develop a website and also do data analysis. So their work is continuing, and the intention is also for us to provide a market to them, give them some work in certain areas so that they continue the work that they do. Next slide. This is just also a reflection on the point I raised earlier on about the importance of a labor market that is stable, and the fact that on an annual basis we track the activities in the labor market, and where necessary, the next slide will just to show you that when necessary, we intervene. Here the next slide we're showing you the impact of the industrial action over the last few years, impact in terms of the wages that was lost, and also the hours worked the hours lost due to stoppages. So we're saying if we don't control this, and that's why the work of the CCMA is very, very important, and the amendments that were made to the Labor Relations Act are key in making sure that there's balloting, so that people don't just wake up and go on strike. There's a mandate given to the leadership of the unions to indeed strike, to go on strike. And the second point is that there are key important provisions that have been included in the Act that allows the minister to intervene in instances where the strike threatens the economy of the country, and the minister intervenes through the CCMA. So there are provisions that have been made to enable that intervention. The next slide. So this is just exactly what I was saying. The next slide. Yeah, the point that we're making is that in essence, even though strike is a very useful instrument, if it's not handled properly, it results in both sides, the employer and employee, losing, where employers would lose productivity and workers would lose wages. And interestingly, if you read some of the reports that we generate, you'll find that workers would then go on strike and say they'll submit their demands and say we need 5%. The employer says we can't afford that. They will then go on strike and come back and settle at either 5% and in some instances less than that. And is there some instances where employees will submit, workers will submit their demands, the employer will say we can't afford it, workers go on strike, the employer says okay, come back, they settle at 7% even though the initial demand was 5%. So these are real situations that are taking place in the labor market that if they are not attended to, and that's why CCMA plays a very, very important role in terms of their strategy to prevent disputes before they even occur at a workplace level. Next slide. What you see there is exactly what I've been saying, that in the fear that we will, the network is not behaving well, I just moved quickly. What we're seeing here is that the second bullet says that the department through CCMA intervention has saved more than half of employees' jobs who were likely to be retrenched from COVID-19 pandemic in April and November of 2021. In addition, the department's UIF payment regarding COVID tears, I think everybody knows about this. So these are the interventions that we just wanted to show you that since the extended mandate was given to us, work has continued as far as implementing this mandate. Next slide. Earlier on, I spoke about pathway management network. So this is what we refer to as a network of networks. The department has an employment services system, which enables the work seekers to register and employers to register opportunities. And there's matching that takes place there. But the private sector has established some networks that are also working. So if you're sitting in one network, you don't have sight of what is happening in another network. For instance, if you're sitting in the network, in the Public Employment Services network, you don't know what Lulaway, Harambee, and others have. So you'll find that you're confined in one space. So what we have done with this pathway management network is to open up the access so that young people are able to, while sitting in the employment services system, you can have a view of what is happening in the other networks, like Harambee, I've mentioned, Lulaway, and others. And that is open an opportunity for young people to quickly access opportunities that are available. So the department, we received an allocation of 304 million in 2022 and 2023, and 372 million in 2023 and 2024 for the pathway management network, which is at the center of the presidential youth employment intervention, comprises of an ecosystem manager and an innovation fund. I spoke about the GTEC being an ecosystem manager and an innovation fund. The pathway management network will stimulate demand by creating more job opportunities, more effectively supporting increased access to relevant education and training interventions, assisting young people to make choices in terms of access to learning and or earning based on their current profile, and identifying barriers that young people are facing on entry to the labor market, thereby informing systemic changes. Next slide. The targets for the ecosystem manager is to ensure the active involvement of about 360,000 young people in the pathway management network and 660 in year 3, with job opportunities targeted in year 2 of 90,000 and year 3 of 165,000. The Innovation Fund will both enable scale up of the different components of the pathway management network through the introduction of between 12 to 15 new partners over the medium term. Next slide. This slide is just shows you where the current challenges are and where we should be directing our intervention as government working with the private sector. Next slide. This is just a reflection of the CCMA National Job Saving Interventions. It's disaggregated into the different months. And again, it's just to illustrate that this intervention does work. Next slide. It's the same as this one. This is to show you the role that NETLEC has played as part of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, responsibility in terms of tracking the implementation of the commitments that each constituency has made in the economic recovery and economic reconstruction and recovery plan. Next slide. This the committee will remember that we always provide this slide when we report to the committee. We indicate the number of work seekers that the employment services system registers, and the employment counseling that our vocational counselors perform, opportunities and placement by province. This, again, as I indicated when we started, that we also assist the people with disabilities the organizations that are responsible for those institutions. So it provides subsidy to those institutions, and you can see what you see there is it's a breakdown in terms of who we funded, and these institutions are able to keep the disabled people engaged, and also train them to make sure that they increase the possibility of them, being key players in the labor market. Next slide. This is the work that is done by the supported employment enterprises, and we're showing you the numbers of the employment opportunities that were given to people with disabilities, and we're sitting at 1,024. And in this financial year, we, I think, already absorbed more than 10 people in the different numbers of the these factories. Of course, one of the challenges with these factories is to get work, sustained support from government, all provinces, and if we're able to do so, these factories will play a very, very important role in making sure that disabled people are absorbed in employment. Next slide. This is just the employment equity profile of these factories. Next slide. This is just the Q3 employment performance, where I said they've already employed 10, people with disability in their factories. Next slide. This is what UIF labor activation projects. These are projects that I earlier spoke about. We have a total of 26 projects that were recommended for implementation. These are just in the pipeline, and they range from, in terms of sectors, from agriculture, construction, hospitality, enterprise development, ICT, retail, security, water, and sanitation. Now, our approach as a department is that we'll only fund projects that will result in employment, that will guarantee employment or enterprise development. So if you come to us with a proposal that you want to train people, and at the end of the day, those people will stand in the street corners, we will not fund that project. We also want those employers who are guaranteeing employment to sign a letter that says, indeed, I am so-and-so, and I guarantee that these young people will be placed in my establishment once they complete training. And the enterprise development, that's the example I used earlier on about Eastern Cape and KZN. One of the projects that already resulted in the employment of over 14,000 participants. So the compensation fund, it operates in the space of the, next slide. The compensation fund operates in the space of the orthotics and prosthetics. And so those are the numbers that they have in terms of providing that service. And this also sustains the companies that are providing this, make sure that they keep these young people in employment. Next slide. The next slide just shows what I spoke about earlier on, the vocational rehabilitation, which the compensation fund does through the disability and rehabilitation unit that they've just established. I mean, if you look at the last bullet, or let me just read it from the top. They have a target of 316, and those are students, continuing students, and they have achieved 318. And out of 411 continuing students, 316 fees have been paid to date. The year-to-date number of learners funded annually at post-school education and training institutions, these are new students, and their target was 779, and they received 526 applications. The finalizing of the payment for 2021 is at advanced stage. It's anticipated that the payment will be wrapped up in February 2022, and the release of the student results and registration the registration of students is not impacted. And then we have for the next one, continuing students with people with disability funded for vocational rehabilitation is 53, and for that they've achieved 100%. So that's the work that the vocational disability and vocational rehabilitation unit does. Next slide. So this is what is in their performance plans, just reflecting that the work that they're supposed to do. The next slide. This is Productivity SA. Earlier on, I spoke about the role that they play in assisting to 10 companies around. So this is a reflection of the work that they've been doing, and they've shared this information with the portfolio committee, and in fact they do that every time they come to the portfolio committee to present their quarterly reports. The next slide. So what we want to do as a way forward as we repositioning our department, one is to expand and leverage the existing employment dimensions of the department. This include improved coordination of our existing DEL entities to maximize impact on employment interventions. Here we're referring to PES, CMA, UIF, Compensation Fund, and Productivity South Africa, and SEE. Building on and expand existing SEE factories to generate increased employment and increase subsidies to NGOs and people with disability to increase uptake. Earlier when I spoke about the importance of supporting these factories, because the more factories we open, the more we'll be able to absorb people with disabilities. Revitalizing expanding programs designed to preserve jobs, specifically the labor activation, workplace challenge, district sector funding, and temporary employment and relief scheme. Maintaining standards, mediate and resolve emerging disputes, and enforce compliance in identified sectors. Regular labor markets research and review to certain aspects of existing legislation, and introduce organizational adjustment and fill positions where the need arise. Next slide. We want to strengthen the role of NEDLAC to facilitate greater business, labor, community, key government departments' participation at national strategic interventions such as Job Summit Resolution, Economic Rapid Recovery Plans, Employment Temporary Relief and Long-Term Measures, and Social Compact. Reassert the DEL and Presidential Program Management Office roles in coordinating youth employment programs across government, and the provision of comprehensive services to young people, and mobilizing and overseeing resources used towards the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative. Next slide. There are policy adjustments that we need to make as we move along, and some of you honorable members will be familiar with the discussions that are taking place, and as far as the National Employment Policy and also National Labor Migration Policy to improve migration management coordination, data management, and address citizens' concern, especially at low and medium skills levels, scarce and critical skills needed by the economy and citizens in diaspora. We want to introduce legislative amendments to strengthen the existing Employment Services Act, review existing legislation on impact to small business, new platform workers, and those in the informal sector. And also cover for those that during COVID we could not cover because they're outside of the definitions of what a worker is. Here we're talking about the so-called independent contractors. This is the what we've done in terms of drafting the national employment policy, achievement of 22.2 million jobs in South African economy by 2030 in line with the NDP, and at an employment rate of 24%, a labor force participation rate of 65%, and 35% levels of economic inactivity and discouragement as a proportion of the workforce. This level of aggregate employment would require the creation of 7,257 jobs between the second quarter of 2021 and 7,257 jobs between the second quarter of 2021 and 2030. Alternatively, a 35.4% rise in employment growth between 2020 and 2030 compared to a 16.2% rise in the working age population. The next slide. These are is a proposed national employment policy vision. The first one is to make sure that we have an inclusive employment growth trajectory. We have harmonious and coordinated implementation of all policy activities and plans across government with direct and indirect bearing on employment creation. Promotion and encouragement of gender equality, structural transformation, and the defeat of discrimination in the workplace. Workplace training, skills development, and continuous learning that responds to shifts in key work processes. The third one being the improving and strengthening the South African labor market information systems framework, improving and widening the access that workers and work seekers have to basic flows of social protection, smoothing the consumption and other shocks experienced by workers, firms, and households in times of economic distress. And the fourth one is strengthening the social dialogue in the workplace and social dialogue institutions that bring together workers, employers, communities, and government. Next. These are the objectives of the National Employment Policy, which focuses on the critical actions in pursuit of the Vision 2022. Also, employment-centered macroeconomic policies, accessible support ecosystem, a demand-led pro-employment macroeconomic policy framework, and a vibrant and labor demand responsive skills framework, extension of social protection mechanism, and intergovernmental and stakeholder coordination framework. So those are the objectives of the National Employment Policy. The sub-theme of the National Labor Migration Policy, one is to make sure that there's policy alignment in National Labor Migration Policy. Here we're saying the alignment with the National Employment Policy section on immigration, its labor market context and impact. And there's a broader context of rising unemployment and informal employment in SA and of skills shortage and skills mismatch. South Africans to be prioritized in key sectors, but all workers should enjoy minimum protection, especially when it comes to wages and work conditions. Next slide. This indicates the rationale for the National Labor Migration Policy. South Africa's labor migration policy should achieve a balance between South African population expectation regarding accessibility to work for South Africans, given worsening unemployment and the perception that undocumented foreigners are distorting labor market access. Secondly, South Africa's labor market needs, in particular the need for critical skills not only accessible, not locally available, the protection of migrant workers and their families in accordance with international standards and guidelines, regional integration and cooperation imperatives. The modern day approach is to harness the developmental potential of migration. We cannot ignore that. Next slide. Agreements at SADC level to develop labor migration policies with countries especially Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Seychelles. These countries have already done so. The need for guidance to Department of Employment and Labor and Home Affairs and other government departments, the need to address insufficient and absent policy frameworks, e.g. concerning recruitment, data requirements, labor migration to and from South Africa. The need to inform appropriate legislative framework to accompany the policy, serving as a mandate for state intervention, and also the need to inform the reconsideration of the current bilateral labor agreements. Some of these bilateral agreements, they come as far back 1960s, 70s. Racially oriented policy framework informed responses to labor migration in the previous political dispensation. Migrants constitute about 4% of the population and 7% of the labor force, especially since 2000, the influx largely of undocumented migrant workers has increased dramatically in an ever-expanding range of sectors. Migrants are in particular concentrated in informal sector, which is a worrying trend. Several legal and policy responses have been developed, e.g. the Immigration Act, Refugees Act, White Paper, International Migration Special Dispensation regime, which is the regularizing of the applicants. Next slide. This is just a roadmap, shows you where we are in terms of the National Labour Migration Policy. We have already submitted the bill to Cabinet, asking Cabinet to allow us to undertake consultation, and that's where we are now. Next slide. This, of course, once we've done all these things, this will necessitate an adjustment to the organizational structure and of the department and entities. So as we conclude a major policy, the department will introduce pilot projects, capacity building initiatives on new roles and functions, systems development and changes to the DEL organizational structure in line with the ILO and GTEC recommendations, internal and public sector collective bargaining agreements and regulations. The ILO conducted extensive reviews and undertook Department of Employment and Labor comparison with similar departments like Department of Employment and Labor in Europe, Asia, America, etc., and are proposing a number of adjustments that we are currently considering. It is our view that this significant shift in government policies and programs will align the department more towards assisting the country to achieve its National Development Plan of 2030 vision. Thank you, Chair, and the honorable members.
Thank you, DG. Thank you for the presentation. Honorable members, any questions, clarities, comments?
Michael Bagram.
I see your hand, Honorable Kado, Honorable Bagram. Okay. Honorable Dana. In that order.
Thanks, Chair. I've got quite a few questions. Firstly, though, a comment that achievement of 22.2 million jobs in the South African economy by 2030 in terms of the National Development Plan seems increasingly like a pie in the sky objective. And my first question relates to how the department is actually going to help achieve it. The President made it very clear in the State of the Nation address that the private sector and not the state is the major creator of jobs. But most of your presentation is quite inward looking in that it focuses on public employment services and what the department's entities are doing to try and stimulate employment through their own internal programs. Surely, given the scale of the unemployment crisis, you should be actively reaching out to the private sector to find out what the blockages are to job creation. And the question should be, what can government do to create an environment conducive to job creation? And then the department should go out and help create that environment. So critically, that would involve revisiting onerous labor regulations, especially those that disadvantage small business. What is NEDLAC actually doing in that regard? The idea of automatically exempting small businesses and new firms from the extension of collective bargaining agreements has been floated for a long time, even within sections of the government. Why hasn't it happened yet? Secondly, on your last slide, or the penultimate slide, you say that the ILO has conducted extensive reviews and undertaken comparisons with similar departments like the Department of Employment and Labour in the EU, Asia, and America, and that they are proposing a number of adjustments which you are considering currently. What are those suggested adjustments? Thirdly, you talked a lot about the National Labour Migration Policy. What are the timeframes for its adoption? But a broader question, is the suggestion that foreign national workers are contributing to our very high unemployment rate? And is it actually supportable with empirical evidence? It seems to me to buy into the idea that jobs are finite, but really we should be focusing on growing the employment pie, not carving it up into slices or quotas. And then finally, on the subject of the PIC, has the UIF taken any legal steps to recover the 1.8 billion rand lost in the PIC deal involving Bounty Brands and Bright Glacier Trading? And if so, can you update us on those steps? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. The reality is what we've just heard, and thank you for that presentation. What we've just heard is a historical look back of what the department's been doing over the past 10 years, if they've been doing it at all, but this is what they've been telling us they've been doing for the past 10 years. Nothing new. The only new part is at page 37 and onwards. The rest is historical stuff and it's not going to take us anywhere. They've been doing it anyway before the name change. We've had the name change 3 years ago. And for the first time, we get a document like this after 3 years, where effectively the department's done nothing except what they've always done. And even then, I have a doubt that they've done it properly. So yes, just to repeat what the Honourable Cardo said, the President quite categorically said, and I think he's now repeating what all the economists have been telling us for 50 years, is that it's the private sector that creates jobs, in particular small business. And the reality is now what we were looking for is what are the proposals, not a history lesson that we've just had. The reality is, yes, government does create some jobs. I mean, let's face it, there are some jobs, and it's good because every job saves a family and people that rely on that family. So I'm not knocking it. But the reality is, if you do it, and I haven't done the calculation, but I've obviously had a cursory look at it now, every job created by government, it costs an enormous amount of money. It's almost R1 million a job. Whereas if the job was created by a deregulated small business community, it would cost government nothing, absolutely nothing. So to look at it, we need to ensure that department goes back to NEDLAC itself and says, you need to start thinking outside the box, not in this history lesson that we've just had. And what are they going to propose that we do? Now, Honourable Carter has made some suggestions about the extension, cutting off the extension of the bargaining council agreements and maybe a deregulation. But we must look at it more carefully. We must think of the Labour Relations Act and see where we can deregulate small business from that Labour Relations Act. Maybe in the first, take businesses or in previously disadvantaged areas employing under 10 people, exempt them from the dismissal provisions completely, which means that they're not married to an employee, which means that the small business would take on an employee more readily without knowing that there's a yoke around their neck. We need to exempt them from all the regulations that are basically paper pushers and keeps the department very busy and keeps small business busy instead of creating jobs. And then obviously the department needs to have a look at tax incentives for small business. Maybe a new business, first 5 years, employing under 10 people, give them some sort of tax exemption. let's have a look at it. And let's have a look at businesses that need to be created in those previously disadvantaged areas where the people are. So there's no travel and there's a lot of people there that can support small businesses, and let's get it going. For if we, all we need to do is to start 1 million new small businesses, and you've probably got employment of 10 million people. I don't know where we're going to get these 22 million people. You're not going to get it from the situation that we've just heard about today. In terms of the migration and those issues.
You are gone, Honorable Bagram. Are you cut or
Sorry?
you are done?
No, I'm still here. What's happened? Can you hear me now?
Honorable Bagram?
Yeah, you can hear me.
Dana?
Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to have a look at this issue with foreign workers. They say it's about 7%. I don't know where they get that figure from, because figures I've been reading is that only about 3% of our workforce is foreign workers. And of that 3%, those are probably people who have got work permits. How do you actually fire people who have work permits because you don't want to have foreigners? Well, it doesn't make sense. And then finally, the president signed the AU agreement, the African Union agreement, which is going to allow free trade and also allow free movement of people. Maybe we should start looking not at the Department of Employment and Labor. Let's have a look at our foreign affairs and home affairs, and maybe someone should build a proper border post instead of just everyone walking through the border. I mean, you just have to pick up a camera and watch people walking through. That'll be a lot easier to control than people who are now actually got jobs already. And then finally as well, the inspectorate. We've got so few inspectors. We've got 2 million businesses and we've got a handful of inspectors. So even if you have all these fancy laws in place, what are you going to do with them? It's like the seatbelt laws with no traffic ops. So thank you for listening to me.
Honorable Dana?
Thank you, Chair. Some of my questions have been covered by the first two colleagues, but I just have one left. One problem that we've seen within departments themselves, between entities and between departments at large, is that they tend to work in silos, where the one doesn't really know what the other one does, or they don't have anything to do with each other, quite often to the detriment of what is supposed to happen. So I would like to know, with regards, an example of this, let me just take a step back, is the employment tax incentive. I've never heard the department refer to the employment tax incentive even once, even while speaking about the expanded mandate as well. So I would like to know, are there any actions being taken at present to promote cost-sharing mechanisms with government, such as the ETI, to private sector employers? Because this is an excellent mechanism to get especially young people into the labor market, but it doesn't seem to be utilized by the Department of Labor. And again, specifically referring to their expanded mandate of employment creation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dana. Honorable Nonsale?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks to DG for the excellent presentation on the expanded mandate proposals document. I think, Chair, firstly, maybe we would need to agree that it would be inappropriate for us to misrepresent the president when speaking. When the president spoke in his opening address of the State of the Nation address, he in fact did talk to the role of the private sector in passing. But again, the president, when he came back on the answering during the debate and the conclusion of the debates around the State of the Nation address, elaborated more on what the view is with regard to the role of the private sector and the centrality of the state in ensuring that jobs are created and the roles of the private sector and that of the state are clearly understood and properly located within the context of a developmental state, which basically is not what my colleagues earlier on have spoken about. I think that point is very important to always emphasize. The second point, Chair, I think we would need to also to draw a line in the difference between when we're talking about the expanded mandate of the department, because it talks about the employment creation and the retention. It's not about the destruction of the existing jobs, because the proposal, the counter proposals that are put forward on the platform too often, or most of them, are in fact an argument in support of the destruction of the existing jobs, which is essentially not in fact a solution or support of what the intention is as put forward by both the president during the State of the Nation address and as well as the proposals that are put forward by the department through the presentation made by the DG. So in that context, I would suggest that rather the portfolio committee chair consider whether, for instance, is it not be appropriate for itself, now that the document has been put on the table, that we agree on a process of engaging with the department and maybe allow the DG to elaborate more on the timelines so that we are able as the portfolio committee now to say what then are the timelines that we would want to attach to the discussion and ensuring that the process of public participation process is in fact arriving at a point wherein there is at least a proper framework taking into account all the views that are in fact are supposed to be taken when we go into the public engagement process with regard to the document, so that the timelines that the department is putting forward are timelines that would in fact at the end of the day result and lead to the finalization of the policy. I'm not in agreement, again, Chair, in conclusion to that, to say the department is in fact already doing some of the aspects that are being proposed. Obviously, the history would talk to that with regard to the old department, but then the question of employment creation has not been the central part of the department. So it is incorrect, therefore, to say that we have already been doing that. That has been a partial role, but to a greater degree, the department has been more engaged in the regulation and intervention and ensuring that there is compliance with the labor legislation. But the employment creation, not a central feature of the functions of the department. Hence the extension of the mandate as initially put forward by President in 2018. So I think that we would need, therefore, to engage in a much more intensive discussion and reach the document and ensure that the areas, including the proposals of the areas that need to be looked at and how they can be utilized to inform our response to employment creation and retention. This includes the issue of finalizing the labor migration policy. Because if we don't pay attention to the timelines as put forward already by the department, the risk is that we are going to engage much more time on shadow boxing on our understanding of the role or of the state and the role of the private sector in employment creation, when in fact we should be in fact engaging on the proposals in front of us so that we're able to respond to the massive challenge of unemployment that affects our communities, which is a serious problem that we must resolve in the immediate instance than the grandstanding that we're doing here in this platform. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, honorable members. I think there is a proposal that is put forth by Honorable Nonsale that as the committee we are to further engage with the time frame on that, further engage with the document. I think that will also assist that in engaging. We will have to also see the need of engaging the stakeholders that are within this this environment, which are those that are in net labor, business, government, and community chambers. Can I then check if we are in agreement with that? Was it the first? Okay, Honorable Ndabe, was it the first time that this is in front of us? Honorable Ndabe, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll formally second the proposal by Honorable Nonsala that the document be a working document, and then we come back and further elaborate on it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Is there anybody that has got a problem with that?
Could I expand a little bit on it, Madam Chair? Michael Bagram.
Honorable Bagram.
Thank you. I would also like to expand on it a little bit, that we get regular reports from NEDLAC as to their, because that's the most important part of this presentation that we saw today. And that NEDLAC is now going to be debating this and taking proposals and watching the way forward, because they want to create those jobs for their 2030. My strong suggestion is that we get report backs from NEDLAC on this on a regular basis, so we don't get presented in a year's time, because it looks like they only want to present it in a year's time, where we are, what they're proposing, what changes they're proposing to enhance job creation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we are in agreement that we need to engage with this document. We must create a space for the committee to sit down, look, and I would want to, which I will also make a proposal to the House Chair, that I think we will need to have a physical meeting, our first meeting in looking into this document and all the issues that are then being raised, which are to enrich it. I agree, it's something that we are to do. We need not we need not be dragging long. Let's take the criticism, which is not in being objective. All of us have been grappling with this, and it is our responsibility that we then have to assert our should I say our authority in saying no, but now we can't then finish the term without having that. We have received it. For me, it's important that we then say, how then do we put the spanner in the wheels so that we're then able to ensure that we really get the outcomes that we are all, because all of us, we want the country to create jobs. How then, as this portfolio committee conducting an oversight over this department in ensuring that that conducive environment is being created. Obviously, it's not only going to be created by the department alone. There are other departments involved, there are stakeholders involved, and in this case, the key and the primary stakeholder for us is one of our entities with his network, where all stakeholders are represented there. I think that was we are agreeing, and we will, as the office of the chair, will then have to, and the support staff will then have to be looking into how then do we ensure that we do that. But I want to put it across to members that it then means it's going to be hard work. Really, honorable members, which, depending if then that is allowed, we then also have to make applications to sit outside our slot, because it's one of the major interests of the citizens of this country, and in that space, in that we are the major role players that are to ensure that as legislators we are going to create a legislation, regulations, and monitor if other departments are assisting in doing that, including taking private sector head on. I agree with Honorable Nonsel. We have got this, in fact, if I am to be open and honest, honorable members, this is a serious ideological battle. And we will have to engage, all of us. Because at the end, it's not about who wins and who loses. It's about what then do we want our country to be engaged on, and how then to ensure that jobs are then being created in the country. So that is that. We will then have to come back. We'll sit and look on that. When can we then have another session where we are really going to discuss? Having said that, honorable members, Deputy Minister, because I think that was the last presentation for today. Is there any?
The Minister is here, Chair. I'm sure the Minister would want to go.
Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Chair. No, Chair. Thanks very much, and I think you did receive my apology because I had items in the cabinet. But I thought that the Honorable Nonsel has summed the debate properly on this particular matter, and I'm happy that Honorable Begram has corrected Honorable Kadu that these issues are still going to be debated in Network. The President gave his SONA 2 weeks ago. Last week we were debating the SONA, and we are going to be dealing with the budget, which all have implications on the issues of employment and the discussions at Network. We are preparing very hard to go to Network, distill the issues, and I think the catchphrase is when you deal with unemployment, you must deal with the issues of poverty and inequality. And we must not run away from the fact that in South Africa, even before you talk about inequalities generally in society, there are even issues of inequalities of opportunities. There are people who have better opportunities than others because of the previous regime. You can't run away from that. There are inequalities which are in terms of earnings and which are racially skewed and gender skewed. We have to deal with those issues if we want to deal with the issues of poverty. So when you deal with unemployment, you will have to take all those issues into consideration. But I think that what the President emphasized was talking about reducing the regulatory and administrative cost of doing business, referring to the small businesses, referring to the cooperatives and informal businesses, without compromising the workers' rights. without compromising the workers' rights, the basic conditions of workers, equity, health, and safety issues at the workplace. You can't be talking about wholesale deregulation. The president has never said that. We are going there at NECLE with identified issues from the side of business, from the side of labor, from the side of the community to say, what are these areas of constraints? And we must remember already, in the very legislation we have, there are already exemptions which people can apply for. So to talk about the whole deregulation of business so that they can do and fire the workers as they wish, it cannot happen. That's what the president said. We can talk about the constraints and say, in which areas do we reduce those administrative burdens? And as Honorable Nontsele has indicated, this issue of adding this new mandate, it's work in progress. You have to put the proper structure. You have to re-examine your structures. That's why the DG went back to where we're coming from. Re-examine your structures and say, where are you going to do the adjustments? Are you going to come with totally new structures? Because there must be a total realignment. It's not going to be a day's work. And you have to do consultation with the stakeholders, including the unions, including yourselves, as you are saying. And definitely, we will be able to come back here on the discussions at the level of NECLEC and be able to come and report as and when time allows, and we will depend on the committee when they are calling us. We have never resisted coming to the committee when we've been called to come and give report backs. Thank you, Chairperson.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think you have touched on, I think it's really about time now that we reflect on some of these issues that we have been trying to be, should I say, diplomatic in addressing them. But now we are to really look into that. And for me, is that you can never move forward without looking at your history and your past, because your past history is giving you the vision to move forward. Because the danger of not looking into our past history, it's literal to say, forget about what happened. Now we're here, we'll move forward. That we can't. And we will call you, Honorable Minister, and the department to that. That is why I was saying to members, they must know, now we must accept and acknowledge that we are going to be at work, hard at work for the benefit of the country, so that at the end of our term, we are able to say, this is what we have managed to put forward for our country. So it's really going to be a hard work for both of us. So ours is not only going to be criticizing. We must also come up with ideas. The ideas that they are also going to be criticized, we must acknowledge that, but we must then begin to say, what is it that we really want to achieve? And thank you very much, Honorable Minister and Honorable Nontsele, in reminding us what then was then entailed in the State of the Nation address. Now, this afternoon, we will have to listen attentively to what the Minister of Finance is going to put and be able to look and say how then, in what is then going to be presented, what touches into our space as employment and labor. Thank you very much, members. Until we meet again.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
We are
Bye,
still.
Bye.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you.
Bye, Myanmar, and bye, everyone.
Bye.